We are historic fencing practitioners. What that means is we research, study, and practice fencing techniques from various periods of history. We study at a school in Minneapolis called the Center for Blade Arts, which started out as an Olympic fencing school, and then about 20 years ago started a historic program. And we study everything from the late medieval period all the way through up until the early 20th century. My particular area of interest, what I study the most and what I teach, is 19th century military saber combat. So that's why I'm here tonight, because I can actually tell you how a lot of the swords that were actually here were actually used, and what their function was and who was using them. So a little bit about American military fencing. So American military fencing was very heavily influenced at the birth of the country by British and French fencing for very obvious reasons. As the country expanded and as time went on, influences from other parts of the world started to filter in. In the 1840s, 1850s, you started to get quite a large influence from Spanish fencing, particularly after the Mexico-American War and the expansion into what is now the border states there. When we start getting into the late 19th century and the early 20th century, you start to get a heavy Italian influence and classical fencing because of the large influx of Italian immigrants. And then, weirdly enough, there's also a heavy influence from Filipino martial arts because of the US military operations down there in Southeast Asia. So it really is, American sword combat really is kind of one of the original mixed martial arts. It takes a lot of things from all over the world and just kind of squeezes them all together.
And we do have a Filipino sword on display up here as well. It's the hatchet-looking one. Okay, so we have a little bit of a presentation doing an overview of swordsmanship, what it looked like at this time with the variety of weapons that we have here, what it represented. You will see on the PowerPoint pictures from historical manuals that were written, treatises written by fencing masters throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. We have Cold Steel by Alfred Hutton.
We actually have them here. I can pass them around.
Yes, Paul has some
take a
copies of some of these manuals that we're pulling from, and he also has copies of other fencing manuals that we don't have up on display here. This is a picture of Hutton, so we know who we're talking about. We have Infantry Sword Exercise by Henry Angelo. This one's 1845, kind of amending an early 1817 manual written by his father?
Yeah.
Yes. Angelo also wrote Hungarian cavalry exercises. This is, what was Waite's first name?
I don't remember.
I don't know. It's a Waite, Mr. Waite. There's a picture of him. And American Navy fencing manuals as well.
That's A.J. Corbessier. He was the head of sword instruction at the U.S. Navy Academy in Annapolis in the 19th century.
These are the types of swords that we are talking about in this time period. We are now developing out of rapiers, one of which we have a Spanish rapier on display up here. You had started to have complex hilts, handguards, so that you were able to protrude your arm forward and that massively changed fencing styles. Previously, when you had something a little simpler, you just had a little bit of a knuckle bow, maybe a side ring of some sort. He has a practice rapier reproduction of a German style there.
And pass this around too.
So
Take a
you
look.
saw that you
Feel
started
free.
adding bars. So you'd start with a knuckle bow, some side rings. You'd start adding bars around your hand to start getting some more hand protection. Previously, you would fence with your hand in back of you, whether straight back or up by your head. There were various guards. You can give point. You protect your head up above. Give point down low while you're threatening your enemy while keeping your hands back away from danger, right? Because the hands are going to always be a primary target because they're nice and easy when they're forward. And if you lose your hand, you kind of lose the fight, right? Yeah. Now, when you start getting complex hand protection with the rapiers, you can start fencing with your hand forward. And that increases the distance between you two. That allows you to do things that you weren't previously able to do. So now we have developed fully from the rapier, which is primarily a pointing weapon, now into the saber, which starting to bring back more of the cutting ability, right? And you'll also see a spadroon. We have a spadroon up on display there. That is a lighter cutting blade. That's more of a transition between a saber and the small sword. I don't have a small sword up there, but a small sword was basically a shortening and a lightening of the rapier that made it a lot lighter and responsive to the points that you wanted to give, right? So rapier is a big, heavy weapon, primarily a thrusting weapon. The small sword is also completely a specialized rapier, basically, completely for thrusting. In fact, early small swords had a little bit of a cutting edge, but then they transitioned to a triangular shaped cross-sectional blade so that there was no cutting edge. It was purely for thrusting. The French heavily favored it in this time, but we don't have any small swords today, so I just kind of left them out. So basically, in the Napoleonic era, you had the British with their sabers going up against the French with their small swords. So it was a kind of an interesting time to be a fencer. Here's a little bit of how to hold. They talked about this in the different manuals we had up there. Basically, you'd have a little bit of a handshake grip, and you'd rest your thumb on the back, and that would help you to control it. Basically, you want to hold it lightly between your fingers. You want to have good feeling, so you want your hand nice and relaxed, right? In cavalry saber, you did want more your thumb in more of a hammer fist grip, but that was only because you have harder percussions and there was a larger likelihood of it getting knocked out of your hand. When you're on a horse, it's hard to get down and pick it back up, so you want to have a good grip. But in infantry saber, when you're you want to have good feel of the blade, a good feel of what your opponent is doing with their blade, and be very nice and responsive. You only get good response when you're nice and relaxed. and you generally hold it in your fingers very, very nicely. Here, okay, so now we'll get it a little bit into showing
I'll show you what these look like.
the cuts
Okay.
and the parries.
So, was anybody here ever a ballet dancer? Okay. So when you start in fencing, you start out in what's called first position, which is your feet. It's very much like first position in ballet dancing. You would stand here, and this is how you would stand. This is first position. He does that. We do this where I'm from. All right. You then go into your stance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my back foot to about shoulder width apart. I'm going to bring my sword up and bring it back. And then I'm going to drop about a foot. You really need to train your body to like this. Because the average human body does not like this. And this is where you go, we do a lot of squats. This is where you're going to start. And he's in what's called the medium guard, if I get front on. My sword is straight up and down and facing straight forward. Give people some space. This could be a little intimidating, I appreciate it. For the saber systems that were common throughout most of Western Europe and the Western diaspora in the US, there are 4 guards. It's not really a guard, it's more of a threat. What I'm doing is I'm sticking my point at you, saying if you come towards me, I'm going to put that end in you. So you have the medium guard. You have what's called guarding third or guarding tierce, where I'm going to roll my hand out here. This will actually protect the outside line of my body. You then have guarding fourth or guarding carte. They sometimes use a lot of French terminology. I roll to the inside, which will protect the inside plane of my body. And you then have what's called the hanging guard, where I'm going to bring my arm up and I'm going to hold it right here. This is less threatening, but it is considerably more protective. This is a true defensive guard. From here, I can cover almost my entire body, but it isn't good for offense. To cut, I have to bring my point back, or I have to lift my point up. And those are very large actions. So, those are the only guards the system uses. Now, there are 8 parries. There are 8 parry positions. You have the first parry position, which is often called prime, which is here. Now, the reason this is the first parry position is because it's your natural hand position after you have drawn your sword. So this is the first parry position. And this covers my low line. I can go higher with it if I need to, but this is designed, if I have my stance right, this will cover me almost from the floor all the way up past my waist. Then there is parry in second position, which is here. This covers my low line on the outside. Third position, all I'm going to do is lift my hand. This will cover my midsection, and I can parry all the way up to here, so I'm covering this entire side of my body. Parry in fourth position, it's similar to the guard position, only what I've done is I've taken my point offline, because this is structurally better for stopping a cut. Parry in fourth position is here, which covers the inside line all the way up. Parry in fifth position, I'm going to bring up, this protects my head. This stops someone chopping straight down and cutting through my skull, which would be bad. I would ruin someone's day. There are, depending on which source you read, there are 3 ways of doing this parry. There is this one where you're at a 45-degree angle. This is actually a trap. It's designed to catch the sword here, and then I can manipulate my enemy's blade. There is what's sometimes called St. George's parry, where it's just a true block, and I would wait for him to pull his sword back, and then I would do something. Now, the technique that was preferred in American system of fencing, which you will actually see in the Navy manual, is they use what's called a seeding parry, where what I do is I'm going to bring my point here. So when the sword comes down, if it's a strong cut, what it actually does is just slides off. That leaves me open to do a large cut through. You then have parry in 6th position. They also vary, but the one that's preferred is here. This is your, oh dear, I've made a terrible mistake, parry. That's the polite language for it. This is something you do when you have no other option but to defend your head. You have parry in 7th, which is a low parry here. This is really to stop the inside of your leg being cut, because a cut to the inside of the leg is really, really bad. The skin there is very, very thin. Your femoral artery is also there, and if that gets cut, you've got about 45 seconds. Then there is parry in 8th position. That's here. This is also kind of I'm panicking a little bit. But it's actually a good parry if you're going to be moving out of the way. And you can then follow up with a very large cut. Now, there is only 8 cuts in the entire system. So you have the cutting chart.
Oh, that's way back.
It's way back. I apologize.
That's okay.
So your cuts are all in relative to your body. So here it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 2 other cuts as well, 7 and 8. I will show you those. But it follows a flow. So cut 1 is outside high to inside low. Cut 2 is the opposite, outside there. And 3, 4, 5 is cut to the belly. Cut 6. Cut 7 is straight up and down. And then cut 8, which we don't actually practice in the gym because it's incredibly dangerous. 8 is the opposite of 7. You can probably guess why that's very dangerous.
And I was just reading in Weight yesterday. He does not recommend it, actually, because it's pretty impractical, and I think he's mentioned your leaves your wrist.
Alfred Hutton, who's one of the books there, in one of his books, he says, a gentleman would never do this in the gymnasium. But on the field of battle, you do what you got to do. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's basically what he said. You can do the cuts 3 positions on your arm. So you can do from the shoulder if you need to do a very large cut. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can cut from your elbow. Or you can cut just from your wrist. And weirdly enough, the closer you are, the more of your arm you need to use. Because what I'm trying to cut with is the sharpest part of the blade, and the sharpest part of the blade is that 4 inches. So if I am all the way out here to cut Josh, all I need is that, and I can hit him. But if I'm closer, I have to use more of my arm to get that part of the blade on his body. So the geometry of sword fighting is incredibly important. How you manage the distance and the timing is critical to fencing. Most people think of fencing as a strength-based exercise. I'm going to use my arm, I'm going to use my shoulders, I'm going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger in Conan the Barbarian. I appreciate there's probably people here young enough not to understand that reference. But swords weren't actually that heavy. This is the swords I was passing around. The big, large rapier weighs about 2.5 pounds, and that's a copy from one in a museum. And that's about an average weight. The saber I passed around, which is a military saber, is a little under 2 pounds. So they weren't that heavy. And because they were incredibly sharp, you don't actually need to swing them that hard. So you don't need to be a guerrilla. What you need is to be fast, and what you need is to be smart. I always tell my students, You do not fence with your arms and shoulders and your back. You fence with your hands, your feet, and your head. And that can sometimes take a little bit to get. Most people want to be like, it's Game of Thrones, charge. It doesn't, no. That's a good way to get stabbed in the face.
You know, we have a saying that we remind each other all the time. When you're fencing, you first control the distance with your opponent, then you control the time that your action happens, and then you control their blade, and then you can hit them, right? All three of those are hierarchically in order, so that all three conditions have to be met before you can complete your intention. If one of them is missing, you are probably going to get killed in training anyway, but it's very much a head sport. It's very much a game of manipulating your opponent to do what you intend them to do, and you hide your true intentions behind 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers sometimes, so that your true intention comes when they least expect it, when you are controlling the distance, the time, and their blade.
Fencing is a lot like politics. It's a conversation between liars.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Shall we?
Yeah, you want to show the flow drill?
Let's show the flow drill.
That's a good thing to show.
So first of all, we'll talk about a little bit of the anatomy of a sword. So you have the hilt, you have the grip, this is the shell guard. The blade itself has its own anatomy. There you can break a sword blade down into 2 halves, what the French would call the fort and the foible. So the lower half is what they call the fort. This would be less sharp. This is the part of the blade you want to be parrying with, or you want to be binding with. What's called binding, it's where the swords come together. The last half is what we call the weak part of the blade. It's not really weak, it's just not strong. This would be ludicrously sharp. We're talking beyond razor sharp. You could absolutely shave with it if you needed to. And that is the part of the blade you attack with. Ideally, you want to be attacking with this part of the blade here, this sort of 4 to 6 inches. That would be the sharpest. It would be the thinnest part of the blade. I'll get to that. And it's the part of the blade you can move the quickest, just because of leverage. Good old-fashioned physics. The blade itself, you have what's called the taper. Yours is better at this than mine. So it is wide here, and then it gets thinner. For balance, the sword also has something what's called the distal taper. So if I turn the blade this way, as you can see, it's thick here, and then it gets progressively thinner. This gives the blade balance. It stops it being too heavy on the front, and it also means the thinner blade here can be made a lot sharper. And a lot of 19th century sabers, the entire front edge would be sharpened to a degree, getting sharper and sharper and sharper as it got to the tip. And then they would have what's called a false edge. The 8 to 10 inches on the back here would also be sharpened, and it would come to a point. So you could cut and you could thrust with it. And that also meant you could do some very kind of dirty tricks with the back end of the blade. That's a different story. So when you come up here to take a look at the swords later, I encourage you to look at the thickness at the root of the blade. It's very thick, and then it's hard to see the distal taper on these training swords. It's less pronounced, but on these real swords, it's extremely thick at the root, and that distal taper will be more pronounced on these historical swords. They're in their scabbards, so you can't see the rest of the blade, but at least look at the root of the blade historically, how thick they were, and then it's thinner than these training swords near the tip. All right. grab a mask, just in case. Safety first.
Yeah. And this is standard fencing training gear. This is called a mask. In Olympic fencing, you will have just the mask, but in historical swordsmanship, we also add a back of head protection, because in Olympic fencing, you are in a strip going in a straight line back and forth, whereas historically, you can go around your opponent, you can turn, you can go shuffle side to side, diagonally. So there are definitely opportunities to get your opponent to turn away from you, and the side and back of head will definitely be a target.
So this is, it's what we call a flow drill. It's, anybody here ever done Eastern martial arts, karate, judo, anything like that? It's similar to what they would call a kata. It's a prescribed set of movements that's designed to build muscle memory. So, my voice may get a little out of whack for a second here. Can everybody still hear me? Okay, good. So, all right, the salute. We get into nice things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut to Josh's belly. He will parry. He's then going to come under and cut to my flank. I'm then going to attack his head. He's then going to attack my belly. I attack his flank. He attacks my head. And then we just continue the flow of the prescribed movement. And we can gradually build up speed. And the trick is to do this while not actually watching your sword. It's to know where your body is and what you're doing. So right now, Josh and I haven't actually broken eye contact. So that's just one of the training methods we use. It just builds up the muscle memory for some of the most basic cuts and some of the most basic parries. In an actual sword fight, can I borrow you as a? You can just put the sword down. In an actual sword fight with a saber, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for cuts to the throat, because a sharp blade loves soft tissue. So I'm looking for a cut here or a cut there. A cut straight to the head will stun a person, but with a lighter sword like this, it won't actually cause a catastrophic damage, but it'll definitely make you blink. And it'll cut this part of your skull is incredibly strong, so it might cut a groove there, and it will bleed, and it will momentarily stun someone, but it's not a catastrophic hit. So if a cut to the throat, however, could potentially be fatal. If I'm attacking the chest, a cut to the rib cage is going to do practically nothing. Your rib cage is designed to take that. It'll cut the muscle, and it'll put a nasty cut there, but you're not going to get through to anything underneath. So to the rib cage, what I'm actually looking for is a thrust, because that will actually go through the rib cage. And a lot of these swords were actually designed to be flexible. They're made from spring steel. So I don't know if everybody can see this, but this will bend and go straight back because it's made from spring steel. And I can go all the way to there, and it'll just pop right back. This helps, so the metal isn't brittle, so it doesn't break. But it also has the rather unpleasant function of when this goes through someone's rib cage, it won't actually go all the way through. It will bend down into the body. And yeah, it'll just kind of mince everything on the inside. If I'm going to the lower torso, because of that nice soft tissue there, a cut there across the belly is great. A cut to the flank here, if I can take a liver or a kidney, is a wonderful shot too. Cuts to the extremities are incredibly useful. Josh talked about cutting to the arms and the hands. That's great. If I can get a cut here and sever that bicep tendon, that's going to stop the entire arm working. Cuts to the inside of the wrist here, the outside of the wrist there. I want to be as perpendicular to the arm as possible because I want to cut those tendons. That will stop the hand working.
You have an artery in the wrist as well?
The inside is particularly bad. That could be potentially fatal because if I sever the radial artery, that could be life-threatening. And also, if I'm really good, if I can go here, I can cut his thumb off. Or I can go through the wrist. And these swords were strong enough that if I hit a small joint like that, I could just completely take the hand off. Which is great because if he doesn't have, if his sword is on the floor with his hand, it kind of stops him, unless he's ambidextrous, which was very rare in the 19th century, he's not picking his sword up. Cuts to the leg are also really good. The hip flexor is a good place to cut. That'll stop your leg from working. The knee is also a good place to cut. And as I talked about before, the inside of the leg with the femoral artery, and also higher where the femoral artery is too, is also a good place to cut someone. When you see the movies and you see this a lot of the sword fighting they do, it was actually a pretty gruesome, rather unpleasant thing to have to do.
I do want to note, when we talked about the cuts before, those are the movements or the actions your sword is making. That's not necessarily to any particular target. You apply that movement to whatever target you intend to go after, whether it's the wrist when you're farther out like this, or whether it's the belly or the flank. It can be high or low when you're doing a horizontal cut, right? And so that's why you saw pictures of your guards starting low and working their way up higher, right? Because that cut can be applied either up here or down here at the leg or in the middle area.
A very popular technique which comes from the French system was what's called a molinet or a molinello. And that is a large circular motion with the sword to generate speed within your blade. Not necessarily force. You weren't necessarily hitting very hard. You were just making your sword go very quick because you want that tip to whip through. And what they would do is make large circular motions with that sword from the outside and the inside. And they could really ramp up the speed. And what that's doing is really, really increasing. And you can do it with your whole arm too. And my arm, I'm not particularly using a lot of muscles. And my arm is very relaxed. I'm just kind of letting the force of the sword, the weight of the sword, swing it through. And that really, really gets this tip really working and really moving. And you could really, really, I'm trying to find a polite way to do this. You could literally shear muscle entirely off a human being with it. The reason they did that is, particularly in the 19th century, they were often wearing very heavy, thick woolen jackets, and that's actually difficult to cut through. So you want the sharpest, thinnest part of the blade moving really, really quick. That's the basics of sword fighting in a nutshell for the 19th century.
Pretty much. I had one more cool thing to show. We just talked about different targets. One cool technique that you would do
leg slip.
is the leg slip. So
if we are nice in a fencing stance, and I notice that Josh is going to come and cut my leg, what I would actually do is just move my leg. And you only have to do it momentarily, and then you can put it right back there.
And that's what we talked about, control the distance, control the timing, right? This is the time that we are controlling. If we know our opponent's intention, then we can let them choose their time while we do ours, right?
It has been known, I have been known to do this on occasion, is if I'm fencing with someone, I will actually show them my leg.
And I say, oh, that's a juicy little target. I might like to take that.
And then I know they're going to go for my leg, and as they come forward to cut my leg, I will literally just do this. And they will run right onto the point of my sword. It's kind of mean, but it's also really funny at the same time.
So a lot of fencing is presenting juicy little targets.
Yeah.
You try to make it nice and subtle so they don't think that they're making it nice and juicy for you, but you are.
It's the strike and fade game. It's how to feint. It's coming in. I'm going to hit you in the head. Actually, I'm going to change my mind and I'm going to hit you in the wrist. Oh, I'm going to cut you in the belly. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to cut you in the head.
That's called a feint. We do that first one a lot, where we cut at the head, get them to go up into parry 5, and the wrist is right there. Right?
And I don't need to do a lot to do that. All I'm doing here is my hand is staying in the same position, and I'm just rolling this in my fingers, and I can cut right there. Which is why we have this grip with my glove doesn't show up very well. Well, where I have my finger on the top, because what this in this finger grip, what this allows me to do is to significantly manipulate this in my fingers. I can literally just roll it around. Because that gives me a huge amount of control, and surprisingly a large amount of power can be generated just from your fingers.
I believe it was Hutton talked about preferring a more square back grip because that gives you edges to manipulate side to side.
You might be able to see, but mine actually has a little texture here, where I have feeling there, so I can manipulate the blade.
Here's just some more pictures of slipping the leg and what you can do to your opponent.
All right. Where did my rapier go? Did it work its way back forward? In case anyone wants a comparison of what this is a modern Olympic saber. So this is the swords they're using in the Olympics. This is what we're training with. So that just kind of gives you some example of the difference between a sport and an actual martial art. Oh, thank you. I'm more than willing to hang around after this is all done if people want to come up and look at some of the books, and I'll happily answer questions.
And speaking of training weapons that you might not have seen before, these are called single sticks. These are the historical...
Sorry, Mike. That feedback, I apologize. That's me.
These are the historical practice weapons for saber, spadroon, basket-hilted broadswords of like the Scottish types that you might have seen.
So typically an officer joined the military, went to one of the military academies, the first thing they'd be given to practice with is a wooden stick. It's lighter, you can use it to build muscle memory, and if you actually hit someone with it, they won't bleed out and die.
It allows freshmen to become sophomores.
It allows children to become adults. So every military officer in most of the Western world would have started off with, this is hardened leather, wax hardened leather. Sometimes they'd use leather, hardened leather. Sometimes it'd be woven wicker. Teddy Roosevelt, apparently, was a big single-stick guy. There's documentary evidence of him going out onto the White House lawn with his friends, grabbing a stick, putting on a fencing masks, and then just beating the tar out of each other.
The important thing about these versus training sabers is these are stiff in the thrust. They do not bend or buckle, so it is prohibited to thrust with wooden sticks. If your kids ever beat each other over the heads with that in play, that is the one rule for safety's sake. But the thing...
I have a friend who lost 2 teeth that way by accident, so...
The thing about it is whether you're giving a cut or a thrust, the thrust usually follows the cut. It's pretty much the same action, so you can practice with the cut with the single stick, and then the thrust with the real thing usually follows pretty similarly.
Yeah, and yeah, that's essentially the basics of how to fight like a Civil War U.S. officer.